welcome to another Running on Air video. In this one I want to look at piano technology from about 1990 to the present day, but I want to take a personal view on it and look at it through the lens of the various devices that I've used over the years, seeing how the technology has developed. So it's not exactly a history of piano emulation, but rather a snapshot based on my own personal experience. Before I get into that, if you'd like to support the channel, you can check out some of my tunes on Bandcamp and Spotify, and I will leave some links in the description. So let's get on with it. So I think it's worth just having a quick reminder of how a piano works. I think most people have a general idea, and I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail here. If you look at the diagram, you can see it's an extremely complex mechanism, but I think there are two pertinent points which will help us understand how to make a good piano emulation. You hit a key, the hammer goes up, strikes a string, and when you release the key, a dampener comes down and stops the string from vibrating. That's a really simple way of putting it, but there is more to that. So, for instance, the top notes don't have any dampers. They don't need them because the notes are always short. They don't resonate that long. Also, it's not always one string. For the lower notes, it's one string, and the higher up the keyboard you go, you get up to 3 strings per note. There's one really important point about the piano which really transforms it into a completely different instrument, and that is the sustain pedal. The sustain pedal takes the dampeners off all of the strings so that when you play a note, all of the strings can potentially resonate with what you play. And this essentially acts as an acoustic reverb, transforming the sound from something which is very accurate and very particular into something that is very, very dreamy, and you get washes of sound. It's an extremely transformative aspect of the instrument and as important as anything else. So if you're looking to emulate the piano sound, then you really need to be able to cover all of these bases. My first piano was an old, beaten up upright in absolutely terrible condition. It was essentially untunable, so it had, shall we say, a unique sound. There were signs that someone had opened a can of varnish and then let it drip down inside. So in certain places it was like a prepared piano. But one thing that's interesting about it, it was unique. And of course this is typical of acoustic instruments, that every single one of them, whether good or bad, is unique in one way or another because they exist in the real world. You can't just reproduce that thing, although of course you can sample it. Now, I don't have that piano anymore. I did manage to find a recording of some old improvisations which would at least give you some idea of the tone of it. This is the only surviving picture I have of the piano, and you can't see very much of it except for me posing in front of it. You can see that I was also looking after it really well by having a barrel of beer perched on top. I think we may have been having a party that weekend, and God knows what happened to it during that. it never seemed to get any worse. I think it reached a point where it was so bad that it wasn't really possible to make it much worse. It would be kind of interesting to know what kind of piano it is. I have no idea. I don't have any other pictures. I don't remember who made it. It would be interesting to look it up and know how old it was and things like that. The upright was invented as a sort of cut down version of the grand piano to make it a bit more convenient, but they're still really inconvenient. I had to move the piano around at least 3 or 4 times, and it was such a pain trying to get people to help, trying to find a van, all of that sort of stuff. So in many ways I was quite happy to get rid of it. It served its purpose, but I got rid of it just before I went to music college because, well, you know, music colleges have lots of pianos and I didn't need one while I was there. So when I was at college, I was studying composition and piano as a second study, but that meant that really I should have only been using the standard uprights, which were in all of the practice rooms, and you just basically had loads and loads of rooms that looked a bit like this. And you'd find one and you'd practice, and yeah, that was great. But they were okay, but never really got on that well with upright pianos. So when I got the opportunity, I would quite often sneak into some of the rooms which had a grand piano, and that was just so much nicer experience. Probably shouldn't have been there, but if nobody else wanted the room, why not? On a very few occasions, I even managed to get into some of the concert halls and play on something really, really good, like this one, which was pretty good. Yeah, so the best one of the lot was like a proper concert grand piano. I'm not sure how I managed to get away with playing one of these without someone kicking me out of the hall, but I think I managed to squeeze in a couple of hours here and there. The funny thing about something like this is it does sort of set you up for disappointment when you play any other piano. You play a really good piano and you can just lose yourself noodling around instrument. You get the opportunity to play a decent instrument. It's very difficult to settle back into, you know, something a bit more basic, particularly if it's a reasonable acoustic. You know, that makes a big difference as well. So that's enough about my sort of expectations. Now I think it's time to look at the technology that I've dealt with since that time. So I'm going to go on to the first device I had, which is the QY10, and let's see how well it was able to capture that. And yeah, there's a clue in my laugh. So my first device, the QY10, which dates from 89, 90, I think. Now, I didn't get one till later on, so I think I was still at college, but obviously for like most of the piano work I was doing, I was using the college facilities. So the QY10 was just used for kind of like homework assignments. But once I left college, I was just stuck with this piano sound, and that was it. And yeah, that was challenging. But let's have a listen to it anyway. Let's see if it has any merit whatsoever. Well, you know, it does sound like a piano. You couldn't really mistake it for anything else. But it's sort of got a sort of harshness and brittleness to it, which is not particularly great. The other thing about it is, I'll play it loud. Okay, it gets louder and it gets quieter, but the tone of it doesn't change. Essentially, it's the same sound. So there's no difference in timbre between the loud notes and the soft notes, which is one of the main features of the piano. So that's sort of missing. And the other thing, let's just going to quickly go through the scale. Yeah, that's a classic one there. That's actually got a softer tone, which I prefer, whereas that's more metallic. So what they've done really is they've sampled a note from a particular part of the range, and then they've spread that out to cover maybe an octave or something like that, and then just pitch shifted it. But it's exactly the same recording, which is then spread over part of the keyboard. And then there's another recording for the next bit, which is spread over part of the keyboard. And I think there's probably like maybe 4 or 5 zones which are set up like that. If we go to, let's go high up on the keyboard. I know it's just really bad at the top. It just sounds terrible. It's not something that you could use. Yeah, it's not totally unusable, and I think lower down it's not so bad. I did discover some interesting stuff though while I was doing some preparation for this video. That's the standard lowest A that you will get on a piano, but this goes a bit further. It may even go further than that actually, but this area is very interesting. Well, the thing is, it's kind of gone beyond what you would expect a piano to do, but I may well go back to that because I think that's really interesting, and I think I can probably do something quite dark with that sound. So I learned something. Yeah, I'm not going to be using this piano sound though for any works going forward, simply because I just don't think it's that great. It was just something that filled a gap at a time, but then, you know, the technology moved on and I managed to get something better. Okay, so the next piano sound I've got comes from a similar module to the QY10. It's the SC7. And I got one of these in '96, but again the technology is somewhat older, and it just so happened that there was again another sale and I was able to pick one up for less than £100, and it really was such an improvement. The piano is significantly better, as you will hear shortly, but also there was a number of other sounds which were very useful, and I still like this device very much. So let's get down to the piano itself. So I think Instantly you can hear it's a much more mellow sound, so it's much more usable for actual piano music. Let's just try out some of the dynamics. Now you can definitely hear that when you hit the key harder, you get a brighter sound. And when you hit it soft, you get a softer sound. And that's what makes it really usable. Similar to the QY10, it seems to go far above the piano scale range, but that's fine. There's not really a problem with that. I think one of the things that comes across to me as well is that's a much more usable sound. That is something that you could definitely get away with. Let's have a look at the bottom end. So that is typically the lowest note. Okay, so similar effects. Funnily enough, the QY10 sounds better there. It's sort of dirtier and crunchier. This is better sound. I think the sample rate is actually higher on this one, so you can expect better quality. Let's check out the demo track. Got this piano compared to the QY, it was like, my God, this thing is so good. I'm never going to need another piano ever again. But when you listen to it now compared to what you can get now, I think the main thing is that it sounds a bit flat. It's a bit too uniform and it doesn't have the detail in the sound that you would want from a piano. Yeah, the notes are there, but none of the finer details are there. It's good. Certainly for its time, I think it's pretty good. And it got me through essentially the 90s. So my next piano is Reason Piano, which is a sound pack specifically for the Reason software. And I think I first came across this probably like 2003, 2004, maybe something like that. It was about the time I got rid of all my hardware and started doing music on PC. Now again, with this one, it sounded so good, I really didn't think I'd ever need anything again. And I did use it for a very long time. So let's have a quick listen to this. It's my music, I get to choose the chords. Let's take it up a little bit. Looking at the dynamics. You know, there's a great variety in the tone. It's consistent and yet varied across the keyboard. Let's have a look at the range, because that was certainly interesting on the last two. So let's go down. Okay, so we've got the bottom A, but we don't get any extra notes below that. Now you can actually go in, you can adjust the patch so you can get notes below that, but it kind of sticks to what you would expect from a piano. What's quite useful about this one is because it's software and because it's essentially a patch inside a sampler, we can go and see how they constructed it. Okay, so this is it's not the most recent version of Reason because I don't use it very much anymore. So in a way, it's its own sort of area of retro interest for me. in that it covers all the stuff I was doing in the 2000s and the early 2010s. If you actually look at the way this is constructed, they've put together lots of software modules, and this particular patch is called Steinway Bottom Blend. And that basically means that it has been blended from a number of microphone sources. In this particular case, it's a very close mic'd piano, but also a bottom blend, which I would assume means that there are some microphones underneath the piano. I could be wrong. Anyway, it does produce quite a darker sound, which is what I like from piano, and other people would like other things, but it's one of my favorite patches. So it does mean that you have two samplers full of recorded sounds from a Steinway, and then they're blended together, and then you have various pieces of equipment to sort of balance things out. So let's just have a look at this bottom blend. Now I can expand it. You can then start to see what's going on. So each one of these blocks here will be a recorded sample of some description, and you can see the name of the file, so you can actually dig into the software and find the individual files if you wanted to. And then you can see that what's happening here is that that sample, maybe this one's an easier one to see, yeah, perhaps. You can see that there's a keyboard diagram at the top, and so that sample is stretched to cover that part of the keyboard. Then I'm going to roll on down here. Now you'll notice that we've got a sample for all the keyboard, and then it starts again. And the reason for that is that the first set might relate to the very softest sounds, but the second set might relate to somewhere in the mid-range, where it's just a little bit louder. And then we have another set. So you've got these levels of velocity. You're chopping the keyboard up into sections that way, but then you're chopping the dynamics that way. So that's 3 levels, that's 4 levels. Then we're on to something else here. Now, so that says REL, release, so I would assume then that has something to do with the release resonance, i.e. the sound as the damper comes back down on the string, you just get this sort of residual zzz, sort of buzz noise. So again, let's scroll down, and then we've got a bit more. And the bottom ones, you can see that they've really taken some shortcuts here. So we've actually got low, mid, and high ham, so that's going to be the hammer sound. These things are actually easier to hear if I go back to the control panel, and then you can have a look at the controls. So you've got the release resonance, you've got the hammer sound, something called presence, which could just purely be an EQ function, I'm not sure. And then compression, which basically stops the sound from overloading and going into distortion. And obviously it will create some level of consistency in the dynamics. So if I go with a release resonance, if you hear the end of the notes, there's none at all there. Let's put it up to maximum. Okay, so you're probably not going to want it on full unless you have a specific reason for doing so. So then you just kind of like dial it to the level where it sounds realistic and what you would expect of a piano. Let's have a listen to the hammer noise again. And then up full. This is just one patch, and there are actually quite a few. So if you have this collection, then there's quite a lot that you can do in terms of changing the type of piano you want. You can have something bright or something quite dark, like I like it. And you can then go in, you can tweak things, and you can move the samples around. You can do all kinds of stuff because it really goes down to that microscopic scale. Let's see what the track sounds like. At the time, I really felt that I didn't need anything better, but I was wrong, and there is another piece of software which I want to take a look at. Okay, this last piece of software is Pianoteq version 6. Now, it's actually gone on to version 7, and I do have the upgrade but I've not tried it yet for some bizarre reason. Actually, there's so much that can be said about this software, and there's so many features that it really deserves its own video. So I'll do that as a sort of follow-up to this. Now, I think I've had this for a couple of years, maybe like 3 years at the most, and I've used it on the last couple of albums where I've had piano. The thing that I noticed first about this software is the highs. The high notes are really... they're just so clear. There's something very interesting about this. We can't really look under the hood in the same way that we did with Reason, where we can break it down into individual little notes that have been recorded from a real piano. This doesn't work like that. The problem is that if you are recording a real piano, what you really want is a recording for every single note in every single circumstance that you are trying to capture. That ends up filling up hard disks with enormous amounts of data, and it becomes a bit of a strain after a while. And what's noticeable about Pianoteq is that it's not that big. It doesn't use that much space. And the reason for that is because it uses modeling. Although they do spend the time recording pianos, somehow they're able to capture the information that they need in order to reproduce that sound without just playing back a recording. But it does mean it's actually quite lightweight in terms of disk space. In terms of processing, perhaps it takes a bit more, but I've not noticed it to have an enormous impact. Even on my very old music system, it doesn't seem to really impact it that much. So you're left with something that's very efficient, it's very lean, and certainly to my ears sounds better than anything else that I've tried. But let me know if you think there are better things out there, because it's, who knows, there could be something else. Let's have a quick listen. Perfectly pleasant, can't really complain about that. Let's have a look at some of the range, let's look at some of the dynamics perhaps. Have a look at the bass. Okay, the bottom A. But surprisingly, for some reason, it goes an extra octave. I'm not sure why that is. Was there ever a piano which had an extra octave at the bottom? I'm sure someone did it, but... don't know. What else? Let's try the track again to see how that sounds. It's definitely the best of the bunch. It sounds great, and if you couple that with a good quality keyboard, and I've got something which is reasonable back there, I'm kind of close to getting that ideal piano that I wanted when I was young. I suppose the irony of the whole thing is that I've been trying to discipline myself away from using the piano too much because I want to create a more synthetic sound in what I'm doing. So just at the point where I could perhaps produce good quality or good sounding piano music, probably want to back off a bit. I don't know whether I'm always going to feel like that, but yeah, it's funny how these things happen. It'd be interesting to get a perspective from real pianists, whether they would use this sort of software, whether they would feel that it was good enough. There is nothing like a real piano, as I've already said, and there never will be, because it's a purely acoustic instrument. If you have access to one which is in good condition, in a good acoustic space, you just can't beat that. So I suppose the conclusion from this really is, yes, the technology has moved on and it's amazing how it's done that. It's surprising. But what would be the next step? What would you want more of? I would say, well, that's probably here too, but I don't want to cover that in this video. I'm going to cover that in the next video, where I go into exactly what you can do with the Pianoteq software. Yeah, it has so many capabilities that I want to cover that separately, which I will do soon-ish.
I am more than machine.